This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Good to see everybody. We're continuing the Sefer Devorah. We're up to the 5th Middah on page Yud Daled. And again, we're continuing. Baruch Hashem, we're learning a Sefer of Musar. And the importance of learning Musar regularly. Rav Itzla Petterberg writes in the Koich V'yar on page Gimel, Kli HaMelchama, the weapon against the Yetzer Hara, hu rak limud HaMusar. That's the only weapon against the Yetzer Hara. We're up to the 5th Middah. This is a rather astounding Middah, an amazing Middah. Lo Hechzik lo arapai. He does not maintain his anger forever. So we already said, God firstly, Mikel Kamoicha, He's so tolerant. He gives us koyach, despite the fact that we use that koyach against Him. He continues to give us koyach. Not only that, we create a monster, we create an angel, and God feeds the angel. God feeds the monster that we create. He's over al pesha. He personally comes and washes away our sin. He feels that anytime we suffer, He acutely feels our suffering. But this is another midah, lo hechzik lo arapai. Zoi midah acheres, this is another midah, sha'afilu ha'adam machzik b'chet. The person could continue sinning. In other words, let's say, we don't know exactly why this Magefa happened. You know, Reb Chaim Kanievsky said this week, we were chased out of the shuls because we have our phone out in the shul. That's what Reb Chaim said. So let's say a person continues to do so. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu machzik af. God does not maintain His anger forever. In other words, we could continue to sin, but He doesn't continue to be angry. There's a certain time that despite the fact that we're sinning, Rebbeinu Shalom lets go of the anger. V'im yachzik, and even when He does retain His anger, loy lo'ad, it's not forever. In other words, these are two madregos here. Number one, we could make Hashem angry, and He'll get angry, so to speak, but He'll let off. He'll calm. He'll say, you know what, you may still be sinning, but I won't still be angry. And even if God says, you know what, this Avera warrants that I continue to be angry with you, the Rebbeinu Shalom does not maintain it forever. Elo yavatel kasai, sometimes the Rebbeinu Shalom will nullify His anger, afilu shel yashav ha'adam, even if a person doesn't do tshuva. There is such a midah of Hashem, there's such a hanhaga of Hashem, that we could continue to sin, and Hashem says, you know what, I will not continue to be angry with you. Like we find in the time of Yeravam. Shehechzer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Gvul Yisrael. God returned the borders of Israel, Vehem Hayu Oivdei Agalim, even though they were idolaters. Think about it. They served idols. So God allowed the enemy to conquer Israel. They continued to serve idols, but God relented and allowed them to restore their borders. Hey, wait a second. If the reason why God let the enemy in is because we were sitting with idolatry, and we continued to serve idols, then the same reason why God let the Gentiles invade, God should let the Gentiles maintain possession of the Holy Land until we do tshuva. No, God doesn't work that way. There is a certain point of time where Hashem says, you know what? I'm letting up. Why is He letting up? He got angry, He punished us, so why wouldn't the punishment continue until we change? No. V'richam aleihem. Hashem had mercy on them. V'loi shavu, they didn't do tshuva. Imkein lo marichem. So why did God have mercy? B'shvil midazo. It's because of this character trait. That God there's a finite length to His anger. He doesn't maintain His anger, and even when He does, He doesn't. Meaning, He allows His anger to subside, and even when He allows His anger to continue, it eventually subsides, despite the fact that the person didn't do tshuva. God does not maintain His anger forever. Adarabba, just the opposite. Machalish apai. He weakens His anger. Despite the fact the sin is still extant, meaning God could bring punishment because of sin, and even though it's sin, God stops the punishment. Ela mitzape, God anticipates. Umerachem, and He has mercy. Ula yashuvu. Maybe, you know what God says? I guess if they're not learning their lesson the hard way, maybe they'll learn the soft way. Maybe if I have rachmanas on them, even though they're sinning, maybe then they'll do tshuva. You know, you would think you have to hit them harder, hit them harder, hit them harder. You're dealing with a kid. You tell the kid, if you don't behave, you're going to get a punishment. He gets a punishment. He doesn't behave. You have to get a more severe punishment. You have to get a more severe punishment. And the way we interact with people is, maybe the repercussions are not strong enough. We're going to give it stronger. We're going to punish more. God says, I'm going to punish more. Oh, it's not working? Okay, back off. There is such a hanhaga of God where He says, okay, if the tough approach is not working, at some point in time, God tries rachamim even when the person is sinning. V'hainu ela mitzape u'merachim ulai yashuvu. Maybe the people will do tshuva. V'hainu, this is what it means. Loila netzach yariv. God will not battle forever. V'loila olam yitar. He will not bear a grudge indefinitely. Ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu misnahig berakus uvekashus. God sometimes deals softly, sometimes harshly. Hakoil l'toivas Yisrael. All for the benefit of Israel. Now we have a few important ha'aros here. We know there's a pasuk, Beroigez Rachim Tizkar. In your anger, you remember mercy. Rav Goldberg interprets that this Middah of the Talmud Devorah is reflected in this pasuk. Beroigez. Beroigez. Rabbi Yoel, we're learning Musar. Rabbi Yoel Silverberg is very proud that we're learning Musar. It's very good. I gave him some nachas. So, Beroigez, in Hashem's fierce anger, even when He should be angry, and even when the sinner warrants the anger, still the Rebbeinu Shalom even then shows a display of mercy. Now, very interestingly, Rav Goldberg quotes the Rav Dessler, the Michtam Eliyahu, that there's a very interesting Yalkut. The Yalkut says that if Klal Yisrael does tshuva, we'll be redeemed, and if we don't do tshuva, we won't be redeemed. And we will not do tshuva unless we're moved from place to place, and unless we have Yisurim, and unless we have no livelihood. And possibly, the Yalkut says, we won't do tshuva until Eliyahu comes. So Rav Dessler asks, Eliyahu is going to come before we do tshuva? Don't we need to merit Eliyahu? After all, Hashem sending Yisurim, the beginning of the Yalkut mentioned. Hashem is sending Tiltal. Hashem sending Golos. So we would expect that until we're not going to do tshuva until the final big blow. No, it seems like Hashem may say at some point, maybe instead of me waiting for you to do tshuva and then bringing Eliyahu, maybe I need to give you some chesed and bring you Eliyahu, and that will inspire you to do tshuva. There is such a hanhaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that despite the fact that we continue to sin, Hashem does not continue to display anger. Instead, He utilizes chesed at the time He really should be angry, ula yashuvu. So I want to share with you another Michtam Eliyahu that Rav Goldberg brings, and this to me is mamish a dvar pele ma'od. He says, we would have thought that if Hashem brings Yisurim on a person, acute Yisurim, and the person doesn't change, we would think, okay, this person is hopeless. There's nothing more the Rebbeinu Shalom could do to get the person to do tshuva. And yet the Talmud Devorah is teaching us sometimes on a dime, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, you know what, the hard approach is not working, I'm going to shower this stubborn person or stubborn nation with amazing chesed, even though they're still sinning and they really still should be angering me, maybe that will get them to do tshuva. So Rav Dessler analyzes, I guess he wrote this in the 50s and the 60s, he feels that the Klal Yisrael being in Eretz Yisrael in the 50s and the 60s, he says Rav Dessler, it's hard to categorize it as the beginning of the ultimate redemption. He says, Kasha la'agdira ke'es ka'aschalta degula. But there's no question, being in Eretz Yisrael is chesed gadol, is chasadim gedolim. And it's a 180-degree turn. 1948 was a 180-degree turn from 1939 to 1945. So what's happening? all of a sudden there was a major tshuva movement? Did Klal Yisrael all of a sudden turn over a new leaf in 1945? And Rav Dessler prefers to view it as, at times, the Rebbeinu Shalom sends a very, very harsh message. And one would think, well, then there's no hope. If we don't even listen to the harshest of messages, we'll never do tshuva. No. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, well, wait a second. Let me try a soft approach. Let me try chesed gadol. Maybe that will get them to do tshuva. There is such an approach. And as we're going to see in the next paragraph, the Talmud Devorah applies this to chinuch. He says sometimes you're dealing with a child and you have to punish, and sometimes you have to rev up the consequences, and sometimes the consequences have been revved up to the highest, and now what? And now what? We're going to see, now what? Now emulate the Rebbeinu Shalom. There is such an approach that when the harshest concept doesn't work, try a little chesed. That's how the Rebbeinu Shalom operates. We can operate this way as well. I'm going to share with you an amazing question that we're going to conclude with. And I'm going to end off with this question because it's a very stirring question. This hanhaga of Hashem we do not find in the Chumash. Think about it. Sodom, they sinned, and they were wiped off the map. You read the Toichacha, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, im telchi mekari, afani halechem mekari. And if you turn your back on me, I'm going to give you chamas kari. And if you do this, I'm going to double the ante, triple the ante, quadruple the ante, 7 times. Do you find in the Toichacha that the Rebbeinu Shalom says, that didn't work. Okay, let me now let me return you to Eretz Yisrael or something, or let me shower chesed on you. We don't find this hanhaga in the Torah. And yet, the Talmud Devorah is saying there is such a hanhaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We find it in Malachim. It seems to be in the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim of Micha. Is it in the Yud Gimel Midos Harachamim of Moshe? Or, let me think about the following, as we mentioned in one of the earlier Shiurim, there's a concept that Yud Gimel Midos of Micha are Midos Elyonim, and the Yud Gimel Midos of Moshe are Tachtoinim. In other words, Tachtoinim meaning we could see it through our own seichel that the Rebbeinu Shalom would operate this way. But the Yud Gimel Midos Elyonim are sort of beyond seichel anushi. It might not even be recorded in the Torah Shebachsav. How about when Hashem killed all the undeserving when going out of Mitzrayim and then gave us Eretz Yisrael? Okay, so Ari's asking, we do find the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us Eretz Yisrael, but one would think that Klal Yisrael definitely worked on themselves and were zoicha to Kabbalas HaTorah. So you want to say perhaps Yetzias Mitzrayim was an example of this hanhaga. Okay, Rabbi, so let's think about this. Where perhaps we could recognize this Middah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Be'ez Hashem, next time we'll see how the Talmud Devorah applies this to our own hanhaga. Wishing everyone a good Shabbos. Shkoyach. Shkoyach Reb Nosson for the cheat sheet. I have to use it. I want to... Shkoyach. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.